Our guests today have a long history in this town. They are Mike Ranville and Fritz Benson. They're here to promote a new cooperative government effort as they talk about their website, About My Good Government. Former state officials and others have contributed inside personal stories on what it's like back in the day, and these two will talk about it. So sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C, a special post-Thanksgiving Day event with our two gentlemen here who are on a mission. Aren't you guys? Mike and Fritz, welcome to Off the Record. Talk to me about this website. And were you guys just sitting around one night around the fireplace saying, let's do this? What happened?
Well, Tim, periodically, a lot of the people that worked in the Capitol, you develop friendships and you meet periodically after. And inevitably, stories of the Capitol are told.
Some of them are true.
And some of them even we can even tell in mixed company.
Yes.
Anyways, Fritz and I left one of those things one night, and we just looked at each other and we said, you know, somebody ought to write this stuff down because it was really funny, and it was the stories have sort of been carrying off the walls of the Capitol for years. And we thought it would be nice just to sit down and to write them down. And then, so we started, and then Fritz had a conversation with then Speaker Bobby Krim, and I'll let Fritz take it.
Yeah, one day, and we thought we'd get back, some stories, kind of humorous anecdotes and stuff like that. And I'm at the Michigan Athletic Club one morning, and right locker by mine was Speaker Krim's, and former Speaker Bobby Krim. And so I'm just talking to him about the project. We're just starting to get going with the project. And I said, how was your relationship with Governor Milliken? And he said, I had a great relationship with Governor Milliken. Every year up until he passed away, I would go up and see him in Traverse City. And we'd go out to dinner and we would talk about all kinds of things. And I'd never heard that. And he said, well, I just did it on my own type thing. And I said, well, how did you work with him legislative? You were a pretty strident Democratic leader. And he said, well, back then we had the quadrant. And it was Governor Milliken, then myself as Speaker, and the House Republican leader, and the Senate Majority Leader who was a Democrat, and the Senate Republican leader. And when there would be a tough issue that would bog down in the legislature, we didn't meet often, but we would get together and talk about it. And I said, did everything go okay? And he said, oh no, we'd get angry, we'd throw stuff down, and sometimes people would stomp out, but we all wanted to solve the issue for Michigan citizens, for the workers, for the businesses, worker comp being one example. And he said, we seem to have some success. And so I took that back to Mike and said, let's dig deeper on this because there's some real stories here.
Okay, but why dig deeper? What's the hidden agenda here, gentlemen?
We think that legislators, at least the majority of the legislators that come in, don't come in to be vindictive to each other. We think that there's a central purpose, and we would like to at least have our project launch a dialogue as to how we can return to the type of civility that Speaker Krim and Governor Milliken had. And we were frankly surprised at that legislators, former legislators, current legislators, people from the Fourth Estate, lobbyists, staffers, they were coming out of the woodwork to say yes. They didn't want to talk about the funny little things that are going on. They wanted to take the opportunity to say there was a time when it worked. Dan Lepp was chief of staff to Curtis Hertel during the shared power agreement back in the 2002, I think is when it was.
This was when the R's and the D's were tied in the House at 55-55.
Yes.
And they had to share the power, and they worked out a plan to do it.
Yes, they did. And Dan wrote a story, and it sort of launched the whole effort. Paul Hilligans then came in, and he said, yeah, I'd love to contribute. And it just sort of took off from there. And we were, frankly, people were coming. We started off soliciting stories, and then people started coming to us.
And offering up.
Yeah.
All right, so who's the intended audience here?
Well, good question, because it's what started out as kind of a Michigan-directed project showing that we can work together. But we saw that, like the Pew Research Center came out with a study recently that said that like 83% of all people want to see legislators work together and solve problems. And the Gallup poll, again in this year, said basically the same kind of thing. And so, we saw where they can work together, and what we did is we asked the contributors that to kind of focus on just a few major areas. That would be effective leadership in democracy, the importance of networking in developing trust and open communication, key accomplishments, unusual alliances that came together to pass legislation, and there's some strange ones. The Fourth Estate, the media, so important, Tim, going back your few decades, and then memorable mentors and friends. And that's, the focus of the book is really on those things coming together. Now, we think it plays out nationally. We think, and we have already received inquiries from the National Conference of State Legislators, a huge national group of all legislators from all over the country, and the Council of State Governments have asked about the progress of our website and the book that will be coming out too down the road.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, that's all right. We were, frankly, shocked in a positive way that it took that turn. There are still stories from the Capitol that still weave throughout the book. Very briefly, I'll tell you one. It was from Mike Griffin from down in Jackson. Mike, a very practical Democrat, a very Catholic legislator who wore his Catholicism on his sleeve. And Cardinal Jaka from Detroit was visiting the Capitol. He's Polish. He was close to the Pope. And he introduced himself and said, I'm Representative Mike Griffin. And he says, you're the second Polish cardinal that I've met. And Cardinal Jaka said, might I ask who the first was, thinking that Griffin had actually met the Pope. And he said, well, the first one was Stan Musial. The cardinal was a baseball fan, and they got a big laugh. But that was the type of stories we started with, and we still are reserving a place near the end of the book to include some of those stories. But the focus now is far more noble than what we had intended.
All right, not to be Debbie Downer here, but let me play the role of journalist. Okay, this book eventually coming out, and what do we have a target date?
Well, we've already submitted it to a couple of publishers who are looking it over. So whatever it takes after that, a few months.
Right now, do a plug, and we'll plug it again. What is the website? If somebody out there who wants to go and read these stories, where do they go?
Okay, the website, which has received over 5,000 hits so far, and it hasn't been out very long, and it is migoodgovernment.com. All one word, migoodgovernment.com.
All right, so the Debbie Downer story here is, who out in this current political climate is concerned about good government?
We think a lot of people are. We've just come through an election that was it was negative campaigning at its worst, and people, I think, are fed up with it. And throughout the campaign, if there's one central thing we think that the people wanted was, don't tell me what you're against, please tell me what you're for. And that seemed to resonate. And if there's any guiding principle that we have is, we'd like to return to something like that. Being a lover of history, I can go back to the 60 debates between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. And if you review that, they get their digs in, if you will, but at the same time, it was focused on issues. And that's what I mean at that particular debate. If you recall, it was the Kimoy Matsu, but it was arguments that they had was on issues. Yeah. And we'd love to have them return, at least to launch a dialogue to see how we could return civility to this whole political process.
And, you know, as I look at it, and I'm saying it was a very negative election, and people, we believe, are looking at some problems out there that have to be solved. And if you have, on each end of the political spectrum, I'm not putting blame on any one party, it's on both ends of the political spectrum. We have some serious issues we have to deal with. Social Security. I mean, in 10 years, they're going to have to drastically lower benefits. You know, it can't continue the way it's going. People need to sit down on both sides of the aisle and solve this, and they could do it. The other one is, another one would be immigration. You know, when you have, I think, pretty much the discussions being done between Republicans and Dems putting together a good immigration bill, well, let's do it, and then we can work on fine-tuning that, but we need something in place, and I think that's what people want to see.
All right, so everybody talks about the good old days, all right, and the Milliken and Speaker Krim is a good example, and other governors have tried to replicate that quadrant, getting all the leaders in the room. But where did things start to go sideways? When did it stop being, we're going to fight it out on the floor and have a drink afterwards, and now it's, instead of going and having a drink afterwards, we go to our separate corners? What happened?
Any number of things may have happened. Term limits, I think, had a lot to do with it. Joe Schwartz, who's been a guest on your show a number of times, indicated, he said, you just don't have the mentors that you used to have. When he came in as a freshman legislator, he said we had people like Harry Gast, who had been there, was a gentleman, and we laughed because Bill Faust, who was Senate Majority Leader, used to hold, he'd call them canasta games, but they were poker games in his office. And people just, they socialized with each other. The intensity of the debate need not suffer, but at least it should be on issues. And I think those relationships that for canasta games are no longer there, because people come in, they go to session, and they go their separate ways.
And
What's your take?
Well, the same kind of thing, but I would offer that, right now, with term limits, it seems like so much power goes into leadership. They raise all this money through super PACs, and they dole out then the favors. And there are no long-standing committee chairs. Can you imagine, back when, telling committee chair, you have to, this is the bill to put out, don't make any amendments. Well, I look at some of the powerful committee chairs there, and we would laugh. But the point I'd like to make, too, is this is not about old times, or that old times were better. We think this is a template for the future. We really do. And, that where other states can be doing the same thing nationally, look to see where issues can be solved and move it really serious things forward. And so that whole template thing, I think, is real important.
But here's the conundrum. The electorate voted for term limits in large numbers, okay? And as you mentioned earlier, 83%, as you did with the Pew Report, want good government and people to work together. There's a disconnect on those two things. Yeah. Am I not correct, gentlemen?
You are.
All right, so you can't have it both ways, okay? This was we're going to send them a message, we don't like government, and career politicians has become a four-letter word. And that's where your problem is.
But on the other hand, solve the problem. We don't like
you can't
career
have it both
politicians.
ways. You can't have it both ways.
I think
we're trying to set up the dialogue to at least kind of break through some of that right now.
A lot of the response from the electorate is, we don't like politicians, but I like my representative.
Yeah. That's true.
He's a good guy, or she's great. And but overall, I don't care for government or politicians, or they're all a bunch of crooks or whatever. And but I like mine.
Which brings us to the news media. Are we part of the problem?
Yes. Yes. Bluntly, we take on the national scene. We have Donald Trump. A few years ago, when Trump was first entering the limelight, there was a time I was in Ohio, and John Kasich was giving a speech on how do we save Social Security. Not far, just a mile or two away, was Donald Trump, and he was using invective, he was name-calling, and his story is going to appear on the front page because it's a lot more interesting to read than it is to sit down and talk about a real problem as far as Social Security goes. I'm not here to trash Trump, but at the same time, that the media, you asked the question, the media is part of the problem because of what they decide to cover and what they decide to celebrate. Donald Trump hasn't been off the front page for a long time. And when you're in his position, you're saying, I don't care what it is, as long as I'm on the front page.
Also, you have the whole thing of now, with media, it's gone to 24/7. And the various, whether it's CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, they come out and have their own 24/7 shows, so it becomes news as entertainment. And, people, so many people said, Where's Walter Cronkite? Where's the half hour of national news every night? Then that's what we need, and then read the newspaper. But that becomes a problem because they stake out their turf instead of just doing, here's this side, you make up your own mind, viewer.
Well, some would add to this conversation, we need to offer up another part of the problem is the social media.
Oh, gigantic.
Yeah.
You know, if it's you guys against social media, I'm going to bet on them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Well, they get more and more playing time. There is no doubt. On some of these social media sites, and I'm talking about the extreme sites, that will they really be able to answer many of these heavy-duty social problems that we have? You know, can that far-out group amend Social Security? So we have a system in place in 70 years. And I would say, no. Let's get going. It's a team sport, and let's solve some issues.
Is this too simplistic here, but is an electorate the way that you get where you gentlemen want to go?
Yes. So people are making decisions based on the substance of an issue and not the personality. I think we have to add to the equation the death of the daily newspaper as well. I don't know how many times growing up or whatever they say, hey, did you read McDermott this morning, or Mike Royko or whatever in major cities? I recall reading where something dealing with President Eisenhower, and he says, I'll wait to see what Reston has to say about this, Scotty Reston from the New York Times. And I think that the news now is 2-minute clips on the evening news, as opposed to sitting down and reading some in-depth in the newspaper.
Well, the way it used to be is that you would watch the TV news to find out what the news was, and then you went to the newspaper to find out what the news really was. And there's a huge difference. You know,
yes.
The average newscast, 90 seconds for a story to explain what's going on in the state capitol, rots a ruck. Okay, it's just really tough to do.
A cup of coffee in the newspaper in the morning. Rod McEwen said that's love. Is a cup of coffee in the Sunday newspaper.
But talk to somebody who's 27 years old.
Yeah.
It's not where they get their news, obviously, anymore. I don't have a real good answer for that. As
if you had a
younger
silver bullet, we'd have seen it already.
Yeah.
But
that's one of the barriers we are trying to address, and maybe put some cracks in it, and say, if we're going to solve the issues, you can't just be extrapolating some of these arguments out there and then doing nothing, because that isn't going to get it done. So
there has to be political benefit to it, to getting along with the other side. Perhaps it's coming home, reporting on the weekends to your constituents with a pocket full of bipartisan accomplishments. Back in the shared power agreement, people were doing that. And the media, the local newspapers were heralding that, but those local papers aren't there, or they're publishing 2 or 3 times a week now. And it was not only, it's interesting when they determined that there was going to be a shared power agreement, that what Paul Hilligans and Curtis Hertel put together was nothing short of sheer genius. The genius is found in the simplicity of it, where the speaker would have the gavel for a month, and during that time, the other party would be chairing the committees. It's just that simple, and it worked. it genuinely worked. In reading Dan Lepp's article in there, he said not only was the agenda being set by the committee chair, but it was in consultation with the majority and the minority party for that particular month.
You know, also, as we looked at where the situation is right now, I really believe that legislators, both at the national level and the state level, have to hear from their constituents. What have you done on a certain key issue? And starting at the grassroots and building up. And that's when they'll see, geez, maybe we have to do something on the budget deficit, you know, to get it done. And our examples of how it can get done are, again, geared to the future as to how it should get done right now.
Do the final plug for the website. What is it? My Good Government?
My Good Government, as in MI for Michigan. But again, it's a national effort on our part. And it's mygoodgovernment.com, and you will see all kinds of stories in there from leaders, and away we go.
Gentlemen, thank you. It's good to see both of you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks,
Hang
Tim.
in there, okay? Thanks for watching, folks. More of Off the Record, regular format, next week right here. See you then.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.